Okay, thank you, Karen, for that nice introduction. And thanks to Dan Boone and Ryan Belnap. I will mention their names again later if I remember, and don't stray too far from my script. But since you've been seeing their photos, I wanted to thank them for doing all this splendid photography of many of the narrators who we've been able to interview, and they've and the places that the narrators live and work and care about. So, so to me, that's been an important part of the project. I'm going to put those away for now, and just put something else up here, and I will. I'll play a little bit of a video. I'll play a few video clips later from some of the interviews, so you can see those. For now, I'll just put something else up here. This this website that we created just to have something else up there for now. As Karen mentioned, I'm a journalist. I'm not a historian, and I'm not a scientist. And so sometimes it seems a little odd that I've ended up here. But my job is to be curious and to go out into the world and to ask questions about it, and then bring stories back and bring them to people. And lately, well, really for a long time, the stories that have most interested me are the stories about how people are connected to the places that they live, which is, of course, a dominant theme of living in Flagstaff, I think, and in the Southwest. But it's important anywhere. So what are the challenges of living in place? Karen mentioned some of the topics that I've chosen. They tend to be ones that put me in the field with scientists quite a bit, and but also with ranchers, foresters, other people who've lived in one place for a long time. In recent years, I've increasingly been writing about climate change, which I think is this extremely important issue, perhaps the important issue of the time. I think there simply isn't any doubt anymore that human activities from all of us are changing the climate, especially fossil fuels. And some very knowledgeable people, including many here at NAU, say that the Southwest is really going to be at the front lines of climate change. That probably outside Alaska, the Southwest is going to be feeling climate change more than any other region. We're going to be feeling it in things like fires and bark beetle epidemics and drought and so on. And that's because of the delicate ecological relationships that we have here. If you raise the winter temperature just a little bit, maybe the bark beetles don't get killed off, and then the next summer we'll have a bark beetle epidemic. Or if you have a little bit more rain in the winter instead of snow, you're not going to have quite the same snowpack, and you're going to have a drought summer instead of a somewhat wet summer. Seemingly little changes, just a little bit of change in temperature maybe, but those add up over the land. And if you've been here for even a little while, you've maybe seen some of those changes already. Up towards Sunset Crater, you can see where a lot of ponderosa pines have died. Out towards I-40 on the east, and up towards Grand Canyon, lots of pinyon pines dead. So these are changes that are happening on the land just in recent years, and we know that more is going to come. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. That's a really complicated question, a topic for another time. But you have heard that saying about how if you don't understand the past, you're doomed to repeat it. So I know, like my scientist friends do, that there's a lot of virtue in trying to understand the past so that we can start applying that to the present and the future. NAU in northern Arizona have this great tradition of scientific discovery, starting perhaps with John Wesley Powell coming through in 1869 and trying to understand this really weird landscape that he was exploring. C. Hart Merriam, who came through in 1889 to the San Francisco Peaks and had a camping expedition and developed this idea of the life zones that live in the different, along an elevational gradient. Gus Pearson came here in 1908 to found the first forest experiment station in the nation, try to figure out the ecology of the ponderosa pine forest. So that tradition is strong today, and there are a lot of scientists in Flagstaff and elsewhere who are looking at tree rings, fire scars, or looking at dust deposition and pollen deposition. They're looking at erosion scars, vegetation patterns, and all those studies together are adding up to a lot of information about how change has happened. That's really important. But, of course, there are only so many scientists, and northern Arizona is a big place with a really varied landscape. There's a lot that falls through the cracks. So that's why a number of us began talking more than 5 years ago now, as Karen mentioned, about complementing this rich scientific record with oral history narratives. And the idea was to capture some of the experiences and observations of the people who have spent a lot of time living and working on the land, who have spent a lot of time watching the land. If your livelihood depends on the land and on the climate, you're going to pay close attention to what's going on. You're going to understand the differences between wet and dry cycles. You're going to know exactly what's happening with certain springs, and so on. So our thinking was, in any community, there are going to be elders. Some of them aren't old, but there are going to be elders who are the go-to people who have been paying close attention. Some of them have been around for a long time, some aren't that old, but they all practice this art of close observation, this naturalist art of paying attention. Sometimes the lessons that they've learned do get passed on through oral traditions, maybe, family stories, letters, diaries, all sorts of things. But a lot of the people we were thinking of don't really make public speeches. They don't write academic papers or undertake scientific studies. They don't make speeches. They don't conduct their lives in the public sphere. So as a result, often what they have witnessed is a risk of being lost when they pass on. So our idea was to record some of those stories so that their lessons really would be available to people all over the place and for a long time, indefinitely, really. So what we were trying to do really was to understand aspects of the land's history through getting these stories. If you haven't been in Arizona for a long time, I haven't been here that long, 17 years, but you might not appreciate just how much the landscape has changed even in a fairly short time. Just a couple of generations ago, life here was pretty different. One of the photos that we had up there earlier in the slideshow was of Farrell Sakakaku, who was an elder who one of the students interviewed back in 2005 during the first class that we taught. He was chairman of the Hopi tribe, and then later became really heavily involved in traditional Hopi farming techniques, raising traditional Hopi crops, the restoration of Hopi language, and trying to pass these traditions on to new generations. So this is what he told his interviewer about his childhood, which was back in the 1940s. We didn't have 8-to-5 jobs. We didn't have a cash economy. We had the farming economy. If we don't raise anything, we either starve or we have to go to our neighbors to borrow our food. So that's pretty different than most of us live today. No cash economy, raising your own food. Today, Arizona is predominantly urban. The primary reason that we go out to places outside the places that we live is for recreation. That's a pretty big change. So we knew there was a lot to record just as far as documenting those changes. So we set out to find some of those people and to interview them. We were able to find a little bit of money so we could get a video camera and tapes and pay a transcriptionist. And so 5 years ago, Karen and I found ourselves sitting in an upstairs classroom right here in the library, one evening a week with a great group of graduate students. They came from all different disciplines. I think there were 6 different disciplines that were represented among the 12 or 13 students. And that really reflected this fact that oral history is highly interdisciplinary and it cuts across all sorts of disciplines, which to me is one of the great things about it. Lots of people can get involved in it and learn from it. So the students' work was to learn about oral history and then do oral history and then bring those oral histories back into the classroom to learn more about it so that their classmates could learn more about it. And as Karen mentioned, so that they could practice the art of nonfiction writing too, based on these interviews that they did. So they fanned out in pairs across northern Arizona from past Prescott, Verde Valley, Hopi, Page, the Mogollon Rim, kind of in a network, a spider web all across outside Flagstaff. And we had a period of about 3 or 4 weeks in the middle of the semester when we didn't have class, they were out there doing their work, and we just didn't know what to expect. But they came back, and they were all in one piece, the camera was in one piece, and what they had was terrific. They had these stories about great storms, about drought, fires, economic woes. They had a lot of stories about the pressures of trying to make it in land-based occupations in the face of the modern changes. And it was this great treasure trove of stories. And we've since been able to add to that with a lot more stories, partly through another class that we were able to offer a year and a half ago now, and partly through lots of other interviews that we've done outside the class format as well. And as mentioned, we've been able to have many of the narrators photographed by Dan Boone and Ryan Belnap, so thanks to them. So I'm an educator, and a couple things that I really like about this project, probably more than two.